Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. We are excited to have Mary Malone with us from Innovia Consulting, and Mary will be presenting on From Now to Wow, Improving Your Customers' Experiences. And I know you are all eager to get started with this presentation, so before I pass it over to Mary to cover on this topic, I just want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded as well as all of our webinars, and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, and we will answer them as we go along with our session. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Mary to kick off our presentation.
Well, thanks, Angie, and hello, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here today with you. I get to share a lot about a subject I'm passionate about because I believe that the customer engagement and customer loyalty are really key to business growth and success. I hope I give you something that you can take away to use. And I asked, did you think about what I'm talking about and relate to your experiences both as a customer and then as a customer of your business, perhaps? So I always like to talk a little bit about where the expertise that I developed came from. And if you look in LinkedIn, I describe myself as a data geek and a culture freak. And my professional experience largely comes from working on senior leadership teams at two different survey research and data companies. One in particular I spent about 15 years at, and it's a healthcare survey company. Chances are, if you've ever filled out a survey for a healthcare experience, whether it was emergency department or home care or a physician's office, you probably used the company that I worked for surveys. Part of that was growing that business from, I got there with about 14 employees and left when we had about 600. So I understand a lot about moving data around, moving data in, taking data out, and getting it to people in ways that are helpful. So I'm really a data geek. The other part of it is that I'm a culture freak. One of the things I've studied is the anthropology, and along the way, as I was working with that healthcare research firm, I became a subject matter expert in the way of using survey data and how to use data to improve both customer and employee satisfaction, and using quality and process improvement strategies, whether it was TQM in the early days, Lean or Six Sigma. And along the way, I really, started to adopt the strategy, that the adage that culture eats strategy for lunch and breakfast and for dinner. And along the way, really started to focus on leadership development. How we do things here is what our culture is. And if we can be a great place to work and provide outstanding customer experiences, in my mind, that's a great culture. And that has a lot to do with leadership, even more so than just using the survey data. The other thing, just to share a little bit about myself, I grew up in Freehold, New Jersey, so I'm a Jersey girl. I'm on semi-permanent assignment for the last 30 years here in South Bend in Indiana. I live here with my husband. We take care of his mom and my mom, who are great travelers. Here we are in Denmark and here we are in France before COVID set in. I think many of you know South Bend's home to Notre Dame. A little plug for the Innovia Client Conference next year, which will be at the stadium. And as a result, something people tend to know about me is Bruce Springsteen's from my little town of Freehold, New Jersey, and I've seen him 97 times in concert. And so people tend to remember that little fact about me. So when you signed up, the description of the program today is that service is a strategic priority. I believe every associate can impact it. Customer service experience improvement is an organization-wide approach and effort. And E equals G+SS. And I will come back to that key concept as a shared starting point for conversations about improvement. So how are we going to get there? A little agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about feedback data. I'm going to look at the concept of now to wow. We'll take a little look at the Net Promoter Score, or NPS. I'll mention a key important observation about the difference between intent and outcome, and then talk about how you can put E equals G+SS to work for you. So just as a cursory look at customer service data, if you will, or customer data at all, customer feedback comes in many, many different forms. And surveys are just one aspect of customer feedback. I believe in capturing customer feedback from as many different places as possible, whether it's a telephone call or a text message or conducting focus groups or social media posts, to have as broad a mechanism for gathering data about your customers as possible. And you can have quantitative data as well as qualitative data, and both matter and both are important. I think listening and responding to customer feedback is a critical success factor for all kinds of organizations. I think the important part of customer data is to have regular systematized data and ways for dealing with the data. It's not enough just to collect it. And regular systematized data usually means surveys, but not always. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about surveys and surveys data. The other kind of data I'm going to make a specific reference to is complaint data and the importance of making things right. And I also believe in collecting data about complaints and the types of complaints that you're receiving as well. So as a data geek, somebody once told me a long time ago that if you torture data long enough, it will confess. And I believe this and have loved to work with customer service and other data as well. So one of the first confessions that I learned about customer service data was to look at organizations who, I'm going to simplify this example, and say you're using a survey and you have a 5-point scale on your survey, and that the scale ranges where 1 is a very poor, 2 is a poor, 3 is a fair, 4 is a good, and 5 is a very good. So the highest box would be a very good, and the second highest box would be a good. What we've learned over time is that most customers respond in the top couple of boxes. The top 2 boxes, the top 1 box. The top box is really very important. About 20 years ago now, 25 years ago, people started to ask the question, well, if we get results that say 65% very good and 25% good, we can report 90% satisfaction. But another organization that got 25% very good and 65% good could also report 90% satisfaction. And the question is, are these results the same? And for a long time, people treated them as they were. A good and a very good were worth the same. And we saw companies report 90% satisfaction with these results quite often, again, as if they were the same. Well, and people started then to say, well, what if they are different? And so about 1995 was the beginning of some of this work in a really seminal article called Why Satisfied Customers Defect. And it actually looked at the relationship between satisfaction and customer behaviors. And what they started to say is, people who have low scores are really, and this was their term, we're terrorists for your organization. They're in zone of defection. I don't know if you've ever been so mad that you were so mad at a customer experience that you were going to not only leave, but you were going to take all of your friends with you. Really damaging to the organization kind of experience. And then but what they really focused on was the difference between people who had a indifferent experience. I guess today we would use the word meh. That wasn't the word in 1995, but meh experience. And then those who were in the zone of affection, which they called your apostles. And subsequent to that, people wrote books about customer evangelists. But there's actually a difference between having a really good experience that you'll go and tell others about and an experience that's okay, but it doesn't drive your loyalty to the organization. Well, what happened to me, and I think I can do this better than in a chart, is to tell an experience that I had along the way. So back in the day, I was traveling a lot, and I found myself in a town called Guntersville, Alabama. I was doing a presentation for a hospital down there. It was a retreat. And so the night before, I checked into the hotel, and I walked into the lobby, and a nice clerk checked me in, and she gave me a key to my room. And I went to my room and I put the key in, and the key worked. And I walked in my room and I had 2 beds, a TV, a bathroom, and I was good to go. Everything was okay. And I would have said the hotel was good. But over the years, I've remembered this Holiday Inn in Guntersville, Alabama, because the next morning when I went to take a shower, I had a little yellow duck, just like this, on the towel on the edge of the bathtub. And it made me say, wow. Now, I stayed probably in 150 hotels that year, and it's the only hotel that I consistently told other audiences about. And even years later, people would come up to me and say, I finally stayed at that Holiday Inn in Guntersville, Alabama, which, by the way, is not a Holiday Inn anymore. I think it's called the Lake Hotel now. But the point is, it was a wow. Everything else about the experience was just fine. It was exactly what I expected, but the yellow duck made it a wow. It kind of said, hey, you get me. It's hard to be on the road. It was a business hotel, and I don't really need a yellow ducky, but it made them different, and it gave me a story. And like I said, it made me say, wow. So ever since then, I've been talking about the good to great ideas, or the now to wow, or what gives us these memorable moments and stories. And I'm sure that you too can think of wows that you consistently can create for your customers, or you've experienced them. When something happens in it, you go, wow, and then you feel compelled to tell a couple of other people about what that experience was like. Well, along the way, a gentleman by the name of Fred Reichheld started to think about this now to wow question as well. And he wrote a book called The Ultimate Question, and it's come out in a couple of different versions lately. But he developed the concept of Net Promoter Score. And the idea is, if you could only ask your customers one question, what would that question be? Now, I believe that you should ask more than one question, but I just want to talk about Net Promoter Score for a minute, because it's based on the same concept as this now to wow. So the Net Promoter Score asks the question, how likely is it that you would recommend this company to a friend or colleague? How likely is it that you would tell a story to somebody that would encourage them to do business with this company or to learn more about it? And it's an 11-point scale from 0 to 10. I'm not likely at all, or I'm extremely likely. And Fred's concept was that if all the companies that used this, they would be able to compare themselves to other different companies. So first you ask the question, and then you interpret the results. And what he did was take that concept of terrorist and apostle and give them slightly different names. So he called the people who give you a score of 0 to 6 on that question detractors, and he gave 7 and 8s the name passives, and the 9 to 10 he called promoters. So again, those people that are out telling your story. And what he said is, I'm not going to count these people because they're meh, and I am going to detract from your score because you have people who are detractors themselves. And so when you calculate your NPS score, you take the percentage of people who give you 9s and 10s, subtract the people who gives you 0 to 6s, and you come up with an NPS score and ignore the 7s and 8s or the passives. Now, in the end, that means that every company who asks that particular question can come up with an NPS score and rate themselves. And so the question is, what is a good NPS score? Well, if everybody gave you a score under 6 and you had no 9s and 10s, or you would have a score of -100. And if likewise every single person gave you a 9 or a 10, your NPS score would also be 100. But the rest of the scores lie between somewhere between 0 to 30 or 30 to 70. And you can find most companies there. I'll give you a benchmark. A few years ago, Southwest reported it was about a 66. And other companies, I think Apple is variously reported being around a 71, just to give you a sense of what some companies do. Cable companies, internet companies are sometimes around a 4. And so the idea is you can use that information to compare yourself and to think about it. Now, it's not enough to figure out what you need to improve, but it gives you that language to talk about being good to great or what it's going to take to be excellent. So combining those concepts is this idea of excellence equals good plus something special, something unexpected, a wow, or if you will, a duck. So excellence equals good plus something special. So how might you put excellence plus equals good plus something special to work in your organization? So the first thing to ask, I think, is what does your customer feedback say? And by the way, I think you can put excellence equals good plus something special to work in a work group, in a department, in a division. It's easier if you have the entire organization focused on it, but I don't ever like that to be an excuse for somebody to say, well, I can't do anything myself. It's clear that you can have these conversations in a work group. But the question is to say, what does your customer feedback say? And do you have a systemic way to capture that feedback? And then the next question is, what is your vision for service? Is good enough? It may be that works for you. Other people leave it to chance. We have good people, good is good enough, we're not going to focus on it. Other places have a vision for service that's to consistently create wows or some type of equivalent. And then the question is, how is that service vision communicated, executed, and how does it become the lived experience of your team, whether that team is all the associates in the organization or just your individual team, and your customers. And I do want to point out here that when I'm saying the customer here, this could also be internal customers. If your work requires big handoffs to other groups of employees or other associates in the company, it can certainly be focused on the needs of internal customers, although we typically think of it as external customers. Now, I'm also a big believer in honest assessments. And if you're going to use surveys, I do want to point out that, it is a little bit difficult to do this right. Not only, Surveys R Us, it's become so much easier to do surveys these days. There's still an art and a science to doing surveys. But it also requires putting our egos aside and really allowing for that honest assessment. We get vested in how we do it. We get vested in our intent is good. We get invested in we're not going to be able to change something. And so, a lot of times we see denial, where if we don't like the scores on the items, the survey must be bad and our action plan is to drop them from the next survey. Or we end up going back and reporting those top 2 boxes together. We don't we don't do an NPS. We just decide that if they give us a good and very good, they're exactly the same. We're going to treat them all exactly the same, and sort of ignore that which calls us to say, how do we go from good to very good, or how do we go, how do we get that good plus something special to excellence? Now, I do want to share that I do believe that our employees have good intent. And I used to use this picture of Steve's truck and van lettering company in Kona, and actually had his phone number on it. Had to take it off because people were calling him, but Steve did pinstriping too. Now, I always used to ask, Steve's intent may have been to get more business, and he may have had good intent, but good intent isn't the same as great results. Intent and outcome can be separated. And one of the things about putting aside one's ego, working with the data, is that you and your team have great intent. And I honor that great intent always. And at the same time, challenge that results and outcomes can still be better with that good intent. So one of the main things to do then is to think about what that culture of service is, or your customer service culture is. And there's a lot of ways of looking at that, and lots of books have been written about it. And my goal today is not to cover all of these different points, but to say there's a lot that needs to be aligned around vision, mission, and values, and having an HR emphasis, and communicating and rewarding and empowering, and it really designing customer service culture isn't about a flavor of the month or a program. It's the way you develop your culture so that this great place to work, great place to provide a product or a service becomes the way you do things here. However, there are 3 techniques that anybody can use. There's probably more techniques than that, but I'm going to focus on 3 quick techniques that you can take home with you today in order to start you on that path of that now to wow. The first is service mapping. This happens to be one that I worked with Memorial Hermann down in Texas years ago, and I happen to have it. This was cancer, thinking that you may have a tumor or a cancer. And so basically, they take each step. You have a suspicion, you visit the doctor, you pre-register, etc., treatment, counseling, billing. What I point on here is that within each step, there's things that are happening at the customer level. And then the question is, how does that happen now? And what could we do at that step to be a wow? Now, I don't get hung up on how people do maps. It's kind of like a flow chart. If you like flow charts, you can make it a flow chart. But the idea is to find as many steps as possible and to think about each step, how it happens now. Where do you get your data about how it happens now? And then turn that into how can we do it better. So I'll give you an example of mapping out some touch points in the steps. I worked a long time ago with an IT help desk. And it was an IT help desk, and we were working on their service mapping. And one of the big things that the help desk was called to do regularly was help with password requests. So give that as a little bit of the background there. So we were working on 2 things, and we were talking about nows to wows. And so I asked a group, there was maybe 40 people in there, and I said, hey, tell me about the wows that you create, because I know they're creating some every day. Can we systematize it? Can we make it happen consistently? And I said, okay, so tell me your wows. And we broke into groups, and 3 of the groups came back and said, All right, so what's a wow? And they said, hey, when people leave messages, we call them back. I don't know about you, but I don't know that that's a wow. When I leave a message, I kind of expect somebody to call me back, and I'm kind of annoyed if they don't. Now, we can argue about whether or not that happens, but in this particular context, it was not a wow to get a call back. So as we talked about it and as we did service mapping, the team themselves came up with two ideas. First, they said the original wow would be if we always have a human pick up. That's a wow. I don't have to leave a message. And the second wow that they decided they could do is help the person who called design a more memorable password. And you know what? They made their work easier. They got a lot fewer calls because they helped the person design a more memorable password. And that became their wow. Now, one of the things about a wow is that it doesn't stay a wow forever. I mentioned I traveled a lot. You know, back in the day, it used to be a wow if you got a hair dryer. You know, anymore, it's a wow. It's not a wow. It's you're really annoyed if you don't. So that was a wow then. I'm sure that group has gone on to design many, many more wows. Now, the next thing that you can do is you can look not just at service mapping, but you can look at just words that you use. And what I love about words that can be that work or words that wow is that this one costs nothing. It's one of the things about service is people are like, oh, we do better service if we spent more money on it. Just using words can really change customer experiences without charging any extra money. So let me give a simple example of this. When you say thank you to somebody, thank you for doing something, there's lots of different ways they can answer that. They can go, it's my job. Now, personally, I think that's woeful or toxic. The other way they can go is, no problem. Another way they can go is, you're welcome. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But Chick-fil-A's managed to get a whole bunch of teenage type people to say, it's my pleasure. Thank you. It's my pleasure. That's a whole lot different than it's my job. And you can use that example, but to develop your own. What are toxic words to your customers? It's policy. How would you change that into something slightly better, something way better? And you can do whole exercises around going from toxic words or weak words into wow words so that people encounter you as a wow consistently or more regularly than they do now. And then the third example I'm going to give, so there's service mapping, looking at words that wow. And then a third example is an oops or a complaint, as I referenced earlier. So I actually had an opportunity with a colleague of mine to write a book called Making It Right. It was all about service recovery. And I got very, very interested in this topic when a gentleman by the name of Roger Dow, who at the time was the head of all customer service for Marriott hotels, shared some really interesting customer data that they have. And that data was, maybe 25 or 28 years ago now, was that if a customer, they had a certain level of customer satisfaction in their hotels, and that they could get that and pretty consistently get that. But what they found out was that if a customer had a complaint that was resolved really well, they actually had a higher loyalty to Marriott hotels. And so ever since then, I've been really interested in how do we design service recovery. So in my opinion, an oops can and maybe should be a wow. So mistakes happen. Outcome does not equal intent. Nobody intends that a mistake is going to happen, right? So mistakes are going to happen, but a well-resolved complaint has loyalty potential in it. So, it's not the issue, it's how you handle it or don't handle it that become an issue. In fact, Marriott also found that a complaint that was not responded to very well, where they were mad about how the complaint was handled, actually resulted in much lower loyalty. And so the question is, how do you design your service recovery? You can't really leave that to chance. And again, it could be service recovery for an outside customer or for an inside customer. So what I wanted to do today was to take a quick look at customer feedback data. We know from most information that we have that we do a good job. Our complaints tend to be very few. If your company only got complaints, you'd probably be going out of business or close to it. So it's not a surprise that most of the data is good, if you will, or very good, or at 9s and 10s, or 7s and 8s. So what does it mean from now to wow? What it means is that wow, that experience that just a little bit better, creates some different behaviors on the part of customers or employees as well. And if we take a cursory look at that promoter score, just to give you an idea of one way you can look at how data or surveys to kind of get everybody on the same language, what's the likelihood that somebody recommends our company or this particular product? I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and the difference between intent, which is good, and outcomes, which can vary. I wanted to then talk a little bit about how you might put excellence equals good plus something special to work for you by taking a look at your service culture. But as an individual, looking at service maps, looking at words that work, or looking at how you respond to service complaints and how you do service recovery. And in the end, I guess I would always ask, what's your duck? Now, if any of these gave you some good ideas or ways to think or relate to information that you currently are thinking about in your organization, I hope that it helps you to put that to better use. And in the end, I'm also a big person who believes in a bias for execution. So if you have that vision for service, without action, it's simply hallucination. So again, I encourage you to take these ideas and put them into practice. So I'm gonna now ask for Angie to let me know who has the first question. And please feel free to open it up, and I'd love to talk with any of you about this.
Thank you, Mary. First question that we have is, what's the relationship between employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction?
That's a great question, Angie. So employee satisfaction or engagement, there's lots of terms for these things, loyalty. Employee engagement and customer engagement tend to be highly correlated. Now, in some places, it's easier to see the relationship, say call centers or retail setting, where employees who are more engaged tend to have better specific relationship with customers. But it does mean in other settings, let's say looking even in, say, a manufacturing setting, engaged employees are more likely to maybe recruit others. They're likely to contribute to quality and improvement activities more. And so even when it's hidden, there's still that relationship, although it's easier to see when you're thinking about people who are frontline employees with direct customer experiences.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one other question. Can you measure employee satisfaction using the NPS scale?
Ah, so yes, you can use it. A lot of companies like to have their customer and employee engagement number or NPS score on the same dashboard with the same number. So absolutely, you can ask employees about the likelihood to recommend this place as a place to work. But I can say that there hasn't been as much research done on that particular question as it relates to, say, how likely they are to stay with you, how likely they are to exhibit that behavior. But again, you can measure it. Lots of places do because they want to see those two dashboards together. It makes it easier. It's like one number to look at. Again, it's not enough just to measure one question, but it's an easy number to get people focused on and to be talking about it, particularly in the context of that good to great or now to wow.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mary. It appears that those are the only questions that we had for you today.
Well, great, Angie. If you want to learn more about this, obviously I'm really passionate about this subject. I love to share about it. Happy to talk with anybody at any time. My contact information is there, and I hope you took something home that you might be able to do in your work group or in your organization to continue on the road to success. So thanks for letting me present today, and thanks for taking your time.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mary, and to everyone on our webinar today, or if you're watching on demand, we thank you for joining us. And just to let you know, we do have more webinars coming soon. Tomorrow, we have E1 Solutions. Rod O'Connor is going to be presenting on why do I need integration when I have Microsoft's Power Platform. And next Tuesday, the 25th, we have our one of our technology consultants, Seth Lassard. He's going to be presenting on a useful Git branching strategy to use when developing pertinent Business Central extensions. So for more information on those topics, please check out our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events, so you can register and get more info on those. And Innovia has a podcast that is going on. If you have not heard of it already, it's called the Innovia Conversation. And we just want to encourage you to listen to our selection that Steve Waltz and Jeff Progulski have provided to us. And you can find out about all the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page. And that's innovia.com/podcast. So check out the selection and subscribe so you'll be notified when those new episodes air. And Innovia Consulting is proud to be a premier sponsor of Community Summit, which is now a virtual event, and that is October 7th through the 9th. And Summit is the annual gathering of all NAV and Business Central users and supporters. And this event is full of great sessions to help develop leadership skills and improve your NAV BC skills and so much more. So check out our conference page, and that's innovia.com/conferences for more details and to save on your summit registration. And also a new conference that we will be attending virtually is called Dynamics Con, and that's going to be September 9th and 10th, and you can check out our conference page for more information on that. All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on another Innovia webinar. Have a great week, everyone.